there folks, Mr. G here. This is part 2 of the video where we're going to talk about some other types of word problems. These questions are going to involve just straight numbers, there's not really a situation, and a lot of it's about picking apart all of the language to construct the correct equation. So let's look at some examples of this. Our first example here, let's go through and highlight some of the important information. So we're told these two numbers, so one is 5 less than the other. When we take the larger one and add it to 3 times the smaller one, we get 45. We want to find these two numbers. So setting up some variables, we have a first number that we'll call x, and our second number will be 5 less than that. Now we're told that the larger number is being added to 3 times the smaller number. So which of these is going to be larger? Well, it's going to be the first one here because our second one is being subtracted by 5. Anytime you see this word results, this is our equal sign right here. So a larger number is added to 3 times the smaller number. What does that look like as an equation? We have our larger number being added to 3 times our smaller number. Now when we're multiplying something like x minus 5, remember we're multiplying this whole thing here. So this 3 is not just going to be next to x, it needs to be multiplied by both parts. So we actually need to put brackets around this. Because eventually what we're going to be doing is distributing this 3 inside of our brackets. Lastly, the result is 45, so that's our equal sign. This whole thing equals 45. Now we have an equation that we can solve. Like I showed here, the first step, distribute it in, get rid of the brackets. From here, we can gather like terms, move the constant number to the other side by adding 15 to both sides, and finally dividing both sides by 4 to get rid of the 4 in front here. And we get our answer, x equals 15. But wait, remember we are interested in both numbers, not just one of them, so we need to find our smaller number as well. Our second number is x minus 5, 15 minus 5, which is just 10, so here's our 2 answers, and we're done. Our second question about numbers has 3 consecutive even numbers, we're adding them together, and we're getting this result. So again, let's highlight the important information here. So we've got consecutive even numbers. Consecutive just means in order. So consecutive even numbers would be like 8, 10, 12. We're told some information about how they're being put together and that the result is -2. So in this case, we've got 3 consecutive numbers. We're going to get 3 answers. Let's see if we can define some variables. If we call our first number x, the next even number is going to be this number, but plus 2. 8 to 10 is adding 2. For our third one, it's the same idea. We add another 2, or we can say we're adding 4 from our first one. Now putting these all together into an equation, we're told that the first number plus 1/4 of the second, so our first number plus 1/4 of the second number here, so there's our second number, 1/4 is just 1/4, and then we're minusing the third number. And all of this together is -2. Now before we move on, we have to be careful. This 1/4 is not just 1/4 of x, it's 1/4 of this whole number, so we need to put brackets. And same thing with our minus, it's not just minus x plus 4, it's minus this whole thing. We got to make sure we're putting brackets around the entire number here. We're not just subtracting the x, we're subtracting both parts. Once we have this equation, we can get rid of our brackets like we saw before by distributing. So we're going to need to distribute both the 1/4 and this minus sign, and you should end up with something like this. Now, as you can see, we've also got fractions. If you remember, to get rid of fractions, what we want to do is we want to multiply through by a number that's going to get rid of all of these denominators. Now, fortunately, both of these are 4s, so we can just multiply through by 4, get rid of all the denominators. But when you multiply by 4, make sure everything gets multiplied, not just your fractions. And you should end up with something that looks like this. Again, we can gather like terms, simplify a little bit. We should end up with something like this. Move the 14 over to the other side, and we'll get that x is equal to 6. Be careful, we got to make sure we answer the question. We're looking for the next 2 consecutive even numbers as well. So that's plus 2 and plus 4. So our answers would be 6, 8, and 10. This last question here is a bit different. It doesn't really involve numbers, just numbers. It's more about money, but I figured I'd throw it in here because I do like the question. So our third example is about an iPhone that costs a certain amount. We know tax is 14%, and we want to know what the price was before tax. So let's highlight the important information. In this case, there's only 2 really big pieces of information. The cost of the iPhone and the tax is 14%, and we want to know what the iPhone's cost is before tax. So in this case, we actually only have one answer. So let's make that what our x is. So let's call x the cost before tax. Now we know the total price, which is $1,232.34, is going to be the cost of the item, our iPhone, plus the tax. Now we know that the iPhone is just x. Now tax is 14% of the cost of our iPhone. To get a percentage of a number, what we need to do is multiply x by 14%. But we need to turn this 14% into a decimal. To turn it into a decimal, we take our decimal place, we move it back twice. So this would actually be 0.14 as a decimal. And there we go, we have our equation. Now to get rid of all of these decimal places, again, we want to make sure we're multiplying by a power of 10. In this case, we have 2 decimal places, so we need to multiply by a 1 with 2 zeros. In other words, we need to multiply by 100. And there we go, here's our equation without any decimal places. We've got some like terms here we can add. Divide both sides by 114, and we get the cost of our iPhone to be a little over $1,000, so $1,081. And in this case, that's all we need to do. Now, if you'd like, you could check this. So you could check this answer. So we know that X, so our price here, plus 14% of this should be the cost of our iPhone that we were given in the problem. So our tax is $151.34. Adding these two together, we get the number from our question, so we know we got it right. At this point, you can try all of the homework that I've posted, take a look at all of that, and complete the assignment if it's already been posted. I'll see you all in the next video.